Michael from Florida ready to come in. Michael, I think, is an agnostic. And the call screen says, how do you personally deal with videos of supernatural events like haunted houses, for example? Well, welcome in, Michael. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on what you're suggesting? Or are you just asking us, like, how do we deal with supernatural phenomenon that we actually can observe?
Well, first of all, hi guys. Second of all, the thing I'm really getting at is, I suppose just to preface a little bit, I'm sort of in a deconstructing place, and usually when I'm sort of interacting with, I guess, all the different ways that theists support their religion, particularly Christianity. I was raised Christian. The stuff when it comes to like scripture or whatever, because of certain resources like Myth Vision podcasts or whatever, I've always kind of come to see those as, perhaps weak, if not a little bit more abstract in terms of how people try to like prove the Bible's truth via scripture or history. But I suppose what I'm getting at is that when it comes to like, I don't know, either people giving accounts or even sometimes I've seen like videos where like, I don't know, like things are moving by themselves in a room or something to that effect. That is always kind of at least imposed upon me as one of like, the more difficult things for me to, I guess, get over or not get over, but like, I don't want to say explain away because I've always tried to make sure that I'm not being, cynical as opposed to skeptical. And so, for instance, I saw this video not too long ago of, some like the caption was like, oh, smudging gone wrong. People try to like ward off evil spirits with burning sage, and a lot of Christians will of course call that like that's demonic, that's new age, that's a cult, that's whatever. So this guy was trying to like smudge his house, I guess, and like a cross on his wall, like all of a sudden like turned upside down, and then the cupboard door opened, and something fell over or whatever. And of course, the guy was like getting really scared. And in my mind, I was trying to think, is this a fake video? Is this AI? Is this or is it genuine? And in my mind, that usually comes across as I don't know. I suppose sometimes I feel like I can't just like always. I feel like I can't always just lean on, oh, this is a fake video or this is something, because that almost makes me feel like I'm being like I'm plugging my ears and my fingers and saying la la la. I don't see it. I don't see it. Yeah, I don't know if
I
that
think
makes sense.
personal experience with the supernatural is already weak evidence, but secondhand personal experience is even weaker. Like, it's weak enough to say that, well, listen, I experienced something and I don't have an explanation, therefore it's supernatural. I think it's one step removed from weak to say, well, I know a guy that something supernatural happened to him that was unexplainable. It's even weaker to say, I saw a video of a guy that I don't even know that something happened to them that seemed supernatural because there's no explanation for it. So like we're 3 steps removed from even like a bad justification for a belief.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think if I were to see something like this, my go-to response whenever I see something that can't be explained, something like appeal to a supernatural, I ask very simply, do you have any peer-reviewed evidence that indicates that this is a real phenomena? If it's a real phenomena, then it should be studyable. And if it's common, then it should be studyable, right? Like we should see credible sources. We should see these accounts coming from people who aren't like already a part of the religion. I'd be willing to bet that if you dug into the actor or the producer of any of these videos, if you follow the money, you will find that it is funded by some like pro-Christian, pro-theist, pro-spiritual group. It's not some group of atheists that's out there producing these videos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I like I said, usually my mind also starts to suspect that there could be shenanigans afoot, like people doctoring videos or people setting things up in order to sort of like a propagandistic kind of way support their dogma with phony evidence. But then again, it's like sometimes I fear that I'm being cynical and always leaning upon that as a sort of like a way to explain away what I just looked at.
I don't think it's cynical to
because,
say, hey, people lie all the time on the internet. I'm just going to need some evidence that this isn't a lie. I think that that's just like reasonable. You know, you should have really high credence that the laws of physics are true, and all of what you described would just be violations of the laws of physics. This doesn't require like evidence. This requires like incredible evidence.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then, like, even like, I'm pretty sure you guys have either personally heard multiple people give accounts or testimonies of supernatural things happening and whatnot. So is that usually where is that kind of the baseline where your mind goes? It's like, you know, the request for evidence or the demand for evidence, like, you know, strong evidence to substantiate what they're saying. Do you think that there's any there when it comes to like the sheer volume of testimonies that happens, that goes on with supernatural events?
So
Hello?
I'd approach this like a couple of different ways. So
Mhm.
the first thing to know about like spiritual experiences is that they're culturally dependent. People who are Hindu experience Hindu gods. People who are Buddhist experience like Buddhist experiences. People who are Christian experience Christian experiences. The experience that you get is going to align with the culture that you reside in and the things that you already believe. That holds true to near-death experiences as well. The second thing to know is that spiritual experiences involve activation of a part of the brain that's literally associated with auditory hallucinations in people who have like schizophrenia, for example, or like temporal lobe epilepsy. Additionally, some people have literally given themselves like schizophrenia from believing in these and like focusing so much on their religious experiences. There was this one case of an individual, I think he was in like Latin America, but he prayed for his father to get better from a disease, and his father did get better. So he formed a connection in his mind between his act and his father getting better. And he spent so much time focusing on it that he developed clinical schizophrenia. You should just have like really high credence that spiritual experiences are naturally explainable. There's also certain like philosophical arguments that I'm privy to. Say that God causes these spiritual experiences. If God's outside of time, he can't do that. Prior to God causing a spiritual experience, he wouldn't hold the belief that he has caused the spiritual experience. But after he causes the spiritual experience, he would hold the belief that he caused the spiritual experience, which means that God goes from not believing that he's caused the spiritual experience to believing that he's caused the spiritual experience, which would just be a change. And if you're outside of time, you can't change. So I guess, I don't know, that's like kind of a wide variety of ways I might respond to spiritual experiences.
Okay, because I know, well, this is many months ago. I called Atheist Experience about I guess my struggle with like, you know, people like, I'm not sure if you heard of Dr. Richard Gallagher. He wrote the book Demonic Foes, where, you know, he's a board certified psychologist, and he's you know, talked about, like, he's pretty much made a career of talking about how he accompanied exorcists, like Catholic exorcists, and like, you know, unexplainable events that he is sure is proof of demonic possession. And, you know, he talks about how they would always, like, he as a psychologist would always like confirm that these people are not just merely affected or afflicted by a psychological illness or condition, so that, you know, it could then be confirmed that, okay, something actually spiritual is going on here. Like, and of course, the kinds of proofs usually were something that, you know, I think the Catholic Church, not that I wasn't raised Catholic, but I'm just speaking to what he said, how they cite certain things as proofs of demonic presence, like hidden knowledge or supernatural strength or whatever. And I suppose hidden knowledge was usually one thing that seemed to like really show that there's something really genuine happening. But then something that I came across, you know, I was kind of going on a rabbit hole looking at videos about like people either trying to debunk tales of demonic possession, people affirming it. And then I came across a YouTube video from the channel, the Ren Veer Show. I believe it's an Indian man.
Before you get too far along, on a new topic. I think the demonic possession one's actually kind of important. And I'll tell you why, because I've never seen, and as far as I know, there's never been a documented case of an atheist being possessed by a demon or a spiritual entity. Every person who's ever been demonically possessed or spiritually possessed was a believer somehow in a religion or in these particular entities, right? So it seems to suggest that these are psychological phenomenon. And I think this is a really good example of this type of a thing is Jerusalem syndrome. It's this really interesting syndrome where people are so overcome with religious conviction upon making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem that they begin to believe that they are manifesting as some sort of individual from the Bible. The most common is Jesus. A lot of people, about 100 people a year, are hospitalized with Jerusalem syndrome, believing that they are the reincarnated Jesus once they get into Jerusalem. But this never happens to atheists. It only happens to people that are participating in these religions. So if I saw that there were cases of atheists, people who like grew up in Buddhist China, that were found themselves possessed by demons of the Christian variety, then I'd be like, well, this is really interesting, but we don't really see that.
Yeah, likewise, right? Like if I saw like a report of like a Buddhist monk in like the 200s who underwent a possession and said stuff about Jesus, a person he's never heard of before, damn. Maybe that would be good evidence, although maybe it wouldn't be because it would be from like 200. But if there's like truly it was like well documented, like damn, that would be good evidence. There's nothing that's even in the same galaxy as that, though.
It's also true, and not to pile on, sorry to pile on, Mike. It's also true that people who experience episodes of psychosis often have religiously themed psychosis. And I'm thinking of someone just recently who unfortunately self-unalived during a period of psychosis. A friend of the husband of one of my friends self-unalived during an episode of psychosis. But every time he was off his meds and began to experience his episodes of psychosis, they were always religious in nature. And that is very commonly, that's a very common thing to happen. And I think Ian has mentioned it before. There's a really big correlation to people with front temporal lobe abnormalities and people who have religious incursions.
Okay. Well, that was one of the things. I know one thing you guys mentioned earlier about how spiritual experiences are usually very culture related. Like I said, I came across this other YouTube video with this gentleman on the Ranveer show. He was interviewing a Buddhist exorcist, which is kind of the first time I had heard of that. And like a lot of the things that he was saying sounded very similar to the Catholic gentleman that I mentioned earlier. With respect to like proofs of a spiritual entity afflicting a person and something like that. And so I do understand that as well. But I know one time when you guys mentioned you never heard of an atheist who was possessed. There was, I forget his name.
Well,
but
like
there was a gentleman.
Buddhists don't like believe in demonic possession like maybe you think. It's like Buddhists are generally like non-theistic.
Right. But I know when you mentioned that you never heard of an atheist who was possessed. There was a gentleman, I forget his name, but he was doing a web series, I think, or a TV show where he was kind of going around the world, kind of like proving the ridiculousness of different religious claims or whatever. Like he even went to like a football team, I think in Australia, that believed they were cursed by an African shaman, and then he underwent like the ritual to undo the curse, but then the football team still lost anyway, or things like that. And then I think the last person he went to was the I suppose semi-famous exorcist Bob Larson. And then at least in the whole exorcism ritual that Bob Larson was doing, the guy who's an atheist, he started growling or whatever. It was nothing particularly supernatural with respect to the presentation of it. Like, I suppose that could easily have been someone having some sort of mental episode. But I don't know, that was strange in that this guy who was like a skeptic, and he just kind of spent all this time kind of trying to like debunk all these various religious claims or whatever from various faiths. And then when he comes across this exorcist, all of a sudden he's like, growling and rolling his eyes back and all this sort of stuff. So I don't know. It's like sometimes I suppose like, what I'm getting at, and trying to tie this back to my original question, which is when I see like all of these different either stories or even videos of strange things happening that obviously theists will attribute to spirits or demons or God or angels or whatever. That's kind of the thing where I'm wondering, am I being obtuse in just kind of like, I don't know, like
no, I don't think you're being obtuse. I think you want to believe, like when these people are reporting these things, you want to believe that they're true, and you're likely to give them more weight than what I would give them. But to me, they sound more like psychological states. And this is one of the reasons why psychology is such a tricky field, because duplicating psychological studies is notoriously difficult. Like a group can do a study, and then 5 years later, someone can do an identical study with the same parameters and get different outcomes, because the psychology of the mind is such a tricky thing to replicate, right? But what we do know is that like people have experiences a lot, and a lot of them are religious in nature. Not all of them, but many of them, right? Even someone who may not participate in a religion might have a religious psychological phenomenon. So the question I would ask then is, what test can we do to investigate this phenomenon to see if there's anything behind it? Because if there's no way to test it, and it's not reproducible, and it's not only is it not reproducible, but it's not even something that like has a common mechanism, like we can't cause it to happen. If we're completely unable to reproduce the results in like a controlled environment, it sounds to me then like it's a psychological phenomenon.
Okay. All right.
But I guess that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And we're kind of running up on our time limit. Unfortunately, we can't talk any longer, but we appreciate you coming up, Michael.